The Newsagents.
In a moment, you're going to be hearing from Lewis, and he's talking numbers, tax cuts, inflation, growth, interest rates, debt. You know what I'm talking about, all that stuff.
But we need to start here in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, where Emily came across the Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Green, who's known for the odd conspiracy theory. And Emily asked her a question about one of the theories she's advanced that Marjorie Taylor Green didn't seem to like very much.
Can you tell me why so many people that support Donald Trump love conspiracy theories, including yourself? He seems to attract lots of conspiracy theorists.
Well, let me tell you, you're a conspiracy theorist, and the left and the media spreads more conspiracy theories. We like the truth. We like supporting our Constitution, our freedoms, and America first. So,
what about Jewish space lasers? Tell us about Jewish space lasers.
No, why don't you go talk about Jewish space lasers? And really, why don't you fuck off? How about that?
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome to The Newsagents.
The Newsagents.
I know he's been taking advice from Lord Mandelson, who yesterday rather uncharitably said he needed to shed a few pounds. Ordinary families will shed more than a few pounds if that lot get in. Today, if he wants to join me on my marathon training, he's most welcome as well.
So to recap, we've got Marjorie Taylor Green telling Emily Maitlis to, quote, fuck off, and we've got the Chancellor of the Exchequer doing a fat gag on the floor of the House of Commons toward the leader of the opposition. And they say Western politics ain't what it used to be. And though you've probably seen the Emily Taylor Green tete-a-tete, or Emily's sworn enemy, according to the Daily Mail, you've got something else to look forward to stateside later in the show. And for my money, if it's not a viral moment, then it should be.
Boob jobs, butt lifts and Botox.
More of that to come. But first, we've got to talk about the budget. The last budget of this Parliament and probably this rapidly fading government. Westminster likes to talk of fiscal events, moments for a government to reshape the conversation. If we buy the idea that many people pay attention beyond the price of fags, the booze, the fuel, then this is certainly one of the last of them. Virtually every measure was pre-trailed. There were no surprises. And I'm not saying that this was a budget without much of a theme, but for quite a bit of the proceedings, Sky News' main strapline was £5 million for village hall renovations. It all felt a little bit Cohen's hotline. You'll have heard the main takeaways already, probably. National insurance cut again by 2p in the pound, an increase in the threshold where families receive child benefit from £50,000 to £60,000, Labour's plan to abolish non-dom status, stolen by the Conservatives. And in the least surprising news since the bear was last seen traipsing off to the woods, fuel duty was frozen again.
I have, as a result, decided to maintain the 5p cut and freeze fuel duty for another 12 months. This will save the average car driver £50 next year and bring total savings since the 5p cut was introduced to around £250.
Indeed, it's been temporarily frozen for 14 years now, and they say Westminster is ridiculous. The Chancellor overall was political in his tone, if not his strategy. They had a plan, he said. Labour doesn't. And he wanted to cut taxes, and Labour wouldn't, and that the economy had turned a corner.
Surveys by Lloyds and Deloitte show business confidence is returning. In other words, because we have turned the corner on inflation, we will soon turn the corner on growth. And today's OBR forecasts also show that we have made good progress on the Prime Minister's 3 economic priorities. Compared to when the 3 pledges were made, inflation has halved, debt is falling in line with our fiscal rules, and growth is fully 1.5 percentage points higher.
That is despite the fact, of course, that we are technically in recession. We're going to get political and economic reaction to it all in a minute, but 3 main takeaways from me first. 1, this wasn't a very big budget. The biggest measures were national insurance, about $10 billion a year. In terms of changes to government spending and taxation, last year's autumn statement was more consequential. There were no surprises. It didn't feel like a pre-election budget. And if it is, honestly, they've just given up. More likely, it's the building block for one final fiscal event in the autumn where they act more politically still and probably try and give away more in terms of tax cuts. Number 2, there really is no money left unless a future government wants to think creatively about raising new revenue. So basically, with the tax cuts announced this year and in the autumn statement, there is only about £8 billion of wiggle room at the end of the 5-year forecast, basically a rounding error. Now, you can argue these forecasts are basically meaningless, but what it does mean is that if the government or a future government wanted to meet its fiscal rules, it would have very little buffer. A crisis comes along or whatever, and the $8 billion, as I say, basically a rounding error, is gone. And you either have to borrow more, cut more, or raise revenue somewhere else. Indeed, even these sums are predicated on making substantial productivity gains in the public sector, like no one's thought of that before, and on fuel duty rises currently penciled in happening in the future. Again, good luck with that one. Number 3. Hunt was desperate to emphasise how relatively well Britain's economy has done since 2010. But when you dig into the figures from the Office of Budget Responsibility, you see that isn't the case. We know what a long-term productivity and wages crisis we've been in, the worst since the Napoleonic Wars. But even since the pandemic, if you look at per capita or per head performance in terms of the economy, it's dire. The Independent Office for Budget Responsibility confirms that GDP per person will still be below its pre-pandemic peak until 2025. 2025? This is a far worse performance than other countries. Living standards continue to stagnate or worse, which is basically right now all the politics that matters, and that didn't change as a result of the budget today. And actually, while we're at it, number 4, it is just a small thing, but could ministers stop putting Great British in front of every policy as if it makes it good?
I will introduce a brand new British ISA. We value our hospitality industry and are backing the Great British Pub.
The launch last week of the Great British Insulation Scheme was very welcome.
The new national headquarters of Great British Railways.
I am announcing the launch of Great British Nuclear.
I kid you not, we couldn't find a clip for it, presumably because even the most toady minister had enough self-respect not to say it aloud. But we've even had the Great British Firewall. John won't like that. Even Labour are at it.
So we will set up Great British Energy within the first year of a Labour government. A new company.
Sigh. Right, let's deal with the economics first and catch up with Jack Barnett, who is economics correspondent from The Times. So, Jack, your big takeaways from this budget?
Well, I think obviously Jeremy Hunt today was promising voters and some grumbling backbench Tory MPs this would be a historic budget in the lead up to obviously his fiscal announcements there. And it's probably worth taking a look at some of the measures that we can sort of measure him against that pledge. We've always had another to-be cut to national insurance. That means it's now being cut by 4 percentage points in a matter of months. That is one of the biggest individual tax reductions on record. The non-don status has been removed. That's going to be replaced by another system. And there's been some smoothing out of the rigidities in the child benefit system. So there are some definitely things in there which are going to deliver a permanent change to the UK tax system. But, and there is a big but, all of the economic fundamentals sort of remain the same. I mean, growth is pretty fragile. We're not getting back to any sort of semblance of strength until about 2026. Productivity growth still expected to be poor by historic standards. And perhaps the biggest economic story that has kind of loomed over the country since the 2008 financial crisis is that living standards are still going to be pretty stagnant. I mean, the OBR was saying today that GDP per capita growth isn't going to get anywhere near to levels that we've seen in the past decade or so. So how is Jeremy Hunt going to measure up against his own yardstick in terms of delivering a historic budget? Well, I think the things that he will be remembered for is that we've still got low growth, we've got weak labour force participation, and we've got stagnant living standards. Now, these are probably historic landmarks that the Chancellor and potentially the Conservative Party are actually going to be remembered for.
If we take, Jack, the net results of the, not insubstantial set of cuts to national insurance and all of the plans that the Chancellor has unveiled today, is to say that when we look ahead to the future, public spending and public services, some of the totals penciled in the years ahead, I mean, it's going to be very, very tight, isn't it? Whoever is in government.
I've just come from the OBR press conference and I've asked Richard Hughes, who's the chairman of the OBR, saying, what is the biggest risk to the government not meeting its fiscal targets? And one of the biggest risks that he did outline was the spending package. And the Chancellor today has said they're not going to announce another spending review until after the election. Well, as you mentioned there, Lewis, there's been some pretty gloomy projections in terms of where real terms public spending is going in the coming years. I think the OBR was saying it's going to be about 8% lower to when the original package was set out in October 2021. And it seems as if, any government who's going to win the next election, whatever it may be, is really going to have to face up to the reality of, yes, they're going to have to raise public spending in order to maintain public services. But at the same time, how are they going to be able to counterbalance that with maintaining within their fiscal rules? So again, it goes back to this point that any government who is in charge is going to face some pretty tough trade-offs. And the main reason why that is because we have very stagnant growth in the UK economy.
And there is no, Jack, just finally, there is no, as far as I can see, basically now as a result of the changes that the Conservatives have unveiled in terms of their policies over the next couple of years, or their plans, Labour's retreat on their Green Prosperity Plan. Actually, is there much of a growth plan for either party?
Well, I think if you have to look at the main thing that economists say, which the UK economy is crying out for, almost screaming out for, and it has been for the last 10 years or so, is this chronic lack of investment. And, lots of economists will say, how do you sort of boost investment in order to raise productivity and raise growth? Some people say cutting taxes is the best way to do that in order to crowd in investment abroad. Some people saying that we need to raise public investment, so the government needs to get more involved in the economy and actually sort of crowd in investment from the private sector. Well, if you look at the current projections for public investment, they are pretty dire. They're absolutely almost falling off a cliff in the coming decade or so. So Labour's cut back their green investment plan. That doesn't signal if they win the election they're going to be minded to raise public investment by that much. But I think if you asked any economist in the city, I think if you asked any economist in Whitehall, they would say that the one thing that the economy needs is investment. And judging by the Chancellor's current plan, it doesn't look as if he's minded to get the government more involved in order to take on some of that burden.
Jack, thanks so much. Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now the politics. LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, has been working the corridors in Parliament, talking to all the players who matter, and joins us now. So, Natasha, obviously we're talking now, it's 3:45, so the budget is only a few hours old. What is your sense in terms of the political reaction from a big part of the intended audience for this speech, which is Conservative MPs?
It sounds like it's going down fine with Conservative MPs from what I'm picking up, but I think there is a sense that this probably isn't going to be a magic bullet for them to fight the next election and win. I think it's a good step towards it for many of them, and obviously there are quite a lot of measures in this budget that are going to be voter friendly, things like the national insurance tax cut, the fuel duty freeze, of course, and especially some of the other things that we didn't know were going to be in the budget, including the rabbit in the hat for the Chancellor, which was the reform to this high income benefit charge. Essentially, it means that it's going to be a tax cut for those people on middle incomes, middle earners, who would previously have been penalised for earning over a certain threshold. That's all going to be reformed. So that will be a nice voter-friendly policy for some Tory MPs to take back to their constituencies. And you heard the Chancellor in the main statement name-checking all of these Conservative MPs that have been begging him to do all these specific things, and they will be able to put that on their election leaflets come the next election, whenever it might come. And there will be some voter-friendly policies in there. And there will also be some nice economic news, I think, coming down the track for the Chancellor, including things like for the OBR to say that they expect inflation to come down to 2% in the next couple of months. That's going to be something that he will be looking forward to as well. And for the OBR to actually be upgrading growth as well from some of those previously very gloomy forecasts that we saw just a few months ago. And obviously we are in recession right now. So that's Keir Starmer's argument. That's the Labour argument, is that actually the economic situation is still looking pretty poor. But I think the Conservative MPs will be generally on the whole pretty happy with this budget.
There were no surprises, were there, Natasha? There was some suggestion in the run-up to it that maybe we kind of knew about NI, that maybe there may be an income tax cut as well. It didn't feel to me like an election budget or an immediate pre-election budget. Did it for you?
No, it didn't. I completely agree with you there, Lewis. It did not feel like the budget of somebody that's about to call a May election.
6 weeks.
Absolutely not. I do not feel like they're anywhere near that. And there is some speculation that they could have saved that 1p cut off income tax, which, let's not forget, that was a promise that Rishi Sunak made when he became Prime Minister, or I think it was just before that leadership election that he eventually lost to Liz Truss. He promised that he would cut 1 penny off of income tax, and he has not done that yet. So is that going to be still yet to come? Some Tories think that we could now be looking at an autumn election where they could squeeze in an emergency budget or an emergency autumn statement, especially if the finances do pick up, where they could announce that 1 pence off income tax as he did promise. But yes, it doesn't really feel like we're about to go into an election campaign, but I think we can start to see some of the pieces of the puzzle that the Conservatives are going to be laying down as their election indicators, shall we say. They want to make the argument that they're going to cut taxes, despite all that we know about the tax burden being the highest in modern times, despite all what we know from the OBR and from that budget red book, which essentially says that all of these tax cuts are not going to go anywhere near to make up for the tax rises that we've had in the past few years under this Conservative government. But for them, they want to essentially be saying, we are going to cut your taxes. There's a risk that Labour could put them up. That is one dividing line they are very, very keen to see. And I think we will see that with national insurance as well. We've been hearing from Conservative MPs this afternoon who have pointedly refused to deny claims that they could scrap national insurance altogether. Now, Jeremy Hunt this morning...
Which would be huge.
It would be absolutely massive, and they would have to find a lot of money to pay for that. But Jeremy Hunt was very clear earlier in his indication, really, that he believes that workers are taxed twice when they're working, once on income tax and another on national insurance. So I'm wondering if that might be something that we could see in an upcoming Tory manifesto as well.
It would make Liz Truss blush, all of this. Because of that, though, right, and because of the extent of the tax cuts in November and now, and indeed as a result of what Hunt has done in terms of non-dom status, basically taking Labour's policy, it does leave a big problem for the Labour Party, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, their potential future sources of revenue are drying up because it's been given away in tax cuts which they don't oppose. One of their primary revenue-raising policies, i.e. non-dom, has been taken away. And so to fund the limited, albeit limited commitments they do have, they're going to have to think creatively.
They are, and I think Jeremy Hunt said earlier today that it's going to be around £3 billion extra a year that the Labour Party are going to have to find, which essentially is going to be taken away from them by the Conservatives essentially stealing their own policy. And yes, I think they will have to look elsewhere to try and fund the things that they want to do if they do get into power. And Wes Streeting said essentially this much yesterday. He said, well, actually, yes, they have nicked our policies. We're going to have to start looking at something else to do so. And obviously, for Jeremy Hunt, he's able to say, yes, I've decided to nick this idea. But, for the Labour Party, they can say, well, just a couple of months ago, you were calling this dangerous. You were saying this was not going to raise any money at all. You were saying this was going to put off people from coming to the UK and from investing as well in Britain. But yes, I think this budget will really raise a lot more questions for the Labour Party than any other budget that's come so far, because in a couple of months' time, they could be the ones having to make these financial decisions. Essentially, when we start looking through all the detail of this Red Book, I'm sure there will be a few traps that the Conservatives and indeed the government will be starting to lay for the Labour Party in the anticipation that they could win the next election and have to sort out the headaches of these problems themselves in just a few months' time.
Natasha, thanks so much. Big picture then. Britain remains basically economically stagnant, and at heart, neither of the main parties has a growth plan for recovering all of that lost ground. Not even close. Economically, right now, the truth is, on tax and spending, on attitude, on vision, Labour and Tory are not very far apart. Right, that's enough of that. We are going to return now to Mar-a-Lago, of course, the centre of events of last night's Super Tuesday. Since then, Nikki Haley has pulled out, having been basically defeated in almost every contest by Donald Trump. But again, that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear Marjorie Taylor Green finally saying what we were all thinking.
So meanwhile, we've been sitting on the grass in the sort of floodlights next to a causeway, wondering if the FBI are going to kind of come with their sniffer dogs and kick us out.
Yeah, it's now midnight Mar-a-Lago time, 5 o'clock in the morning in London, and the watch party has ended in Trump's extraordinary ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, which kind of chandeliers galore, glass, ornate plasterwork, you name it.
I mean, it looks like something from Mattel, quite frankly, where you could just build it brick by brick. And to be fair, extraordinary ballroom, but also, to be fair, extraordinary and historic night. I don't think anyone has done what he has done before, which is a clean sweep. I mean, apart from one state of Vermont tonight and the District of Columbia, DC, which we talked about yesterday, he's taken all the states on Super Tuesday, and he's done so with ease. This is for the Republican primary. In other words, he's now got rid of anyone else who wants to stand for the presidential election from the Republican Party. So it's just him and Biden.
We're going to straighten it out. We're going to close our borders. We're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to get the inflation down. And we are going to make our country greater than ever before. And we're going to do it quickly. We're going to do it quickly. It's going to go fast. We have to get the criminals out. We have many, many criminals that have entered our country. We have people coming in from such bad places, and we're going to have to get them out. We have murderers that are being deposited into our country. We have drug dealers at the biggest and highest levels that are coming into our country. We have people coming into our country that just shouldn't be here, but many, and I say many, large percentages, they come in through the caravans, they come in many different ways. Now we find out again, they come in through airplanes, we send them in. This is crazy. But they come into our country, we're going to stop them. We're going to close our borders. We're going to have to deport a lot of people, a lot of bad people, because our countries can't live like this. Our cities are choking to death. Our states are dying. And frankly, our country is dying. And we're going to make...
So, yeah, Donald Trump didn't even come to Mar-a-Lago, to the ballroom, until about 10:15. So he really saw out the evening, and he had a room absolutely packed full. The costumes were amazing. The dresses are sensational. The shoes looked so painful. I mean, sort of diamante and 5-inch high and incredibly tight and extraordinarily elaborate dresses, and you sort of watched it like a spectacle. It was somewhere between, Miss America and an election party. I mean, I suppose that is Trump.
With a very
now.
much higher percentage of boob jobs, butt lifts and Botox than you would normally find at, say, a Labour Party conference or a Conservative Party conference.
I think that's probably fair. And an older person. And it's not the traditional white Republican Party. It was much more racially mixed. You saw that straight away. Much more Hispanic, much more African American, Black Americans, and quite a lot, of women and men. But if it tended one way, I'd say it was too old. I didn't see, there is no sort of kind of scrappy, young, hungry student crowd there. In fact, those are the people that Donald Trump, I think, will never get. He will never get the students and never get the college educated. I say never, obviously, that's kind of a ridiculous thing to say, but that's the demographic that escapes him, where all the other ones, in terms of the Republican Party, seem to sort of coalesce behind him now.
No, you can say this, and it was sort of true of Brexit as well, but in the areas where you've got a very high percentage of college-educated young people, Nikki Haley wins. In the areas where they're not college-educated, Trump wins.
Yeah.
And I add that without any gloss whatsoever.
Yeah. So anyway, there we were in the ballroom, kind of doing our own thing, listening to the Donald Trump speech. It was sort of halfway between tired and conciliatory, I think I'd say. And after he left, a few of the Trumpy fans hanging around near the exit. And at this point, I spotted Marjorie Taylor Green. Now, Marjorie Taylor Green is one of the most vocal congresswomen. She's a Georgia congresswoman. She was part of the movement to unseat Liz Cheney.
Wyoming congresswoman,
one of the very few who voted to impeach Donald Trump in the second time after January the 6th. And I caught her eye and I asked her to come over, and we began to have a conversation about Nikki Haley, as it turns out. What do you think the message should be to Nikki Haley tonight?
Well, we've been encouraging her to drop out and support President Trump, and I think tonight is the clear message that President Trump is the clear front runner. He's the winner in our Republican primary, and it's time for Nikki Haley to drop out and support him.
Do you think President Trump, Mr. Trump, is closer to picking his VP, and should you be on that list?
Oh, that's the question everyone asks, and no, I don't think Nikki Haley should be on the list, but of course President Trump will choose who he wants for VP.
Would you like to be on that list?
He's got a long list. I support President Trump in any way he'd ask me, but I can assure you it won't be Nikki Haley.
And can you tell me why so many people that support Donald Trump love conspiracy theories, including yourself. He seems to attract lots of conspiracy theorists.
Well, let me tell you, you're a conspiracy theorist, and the left and the media spreads more conspiracy theories. We like the truth. We like supporting our Constitution, our freedoms, and America first. So,
what about Jewish space lasers? Tell us about Jewish space lasers.
No, why don't you go talk about Jewish space lasers? And really, why don't you fuck off? How about that?
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, 8 years ago, when I was at the Super Tuesday event in the ballroom at Mar-a-Lago, so different, because there was like maybe 3 or 4 dozen of his kind of fans who were there, probably members of Mar-a-Lago, who'd all ponied up the $150,000 a year it is to be a member of this ridiculous place. But the rest of the place was journalists, and we were asking questions of Donald Trump, and it was much more Donald Trump had to prove his worth to the journalist audience. Tonight was a victory party.
Oh, yeah, and we were right at the back. You know, they had a sort of a big rider for the... We were in a pen. I mean, they had a rider for the cameras. It was, I have to say, it was brilliantly organised. You know, it wasn't chaotic. They sort of stuck to their word. The timings were good, but we were a long way back from the action, and there was a woman whose only job was to move a gate every time some VIP wanted to come into the press pen to make sure that none of the press could accidentally escape. I know, and it doesn't leave you feeling slightly like a cockroach.
Yeah, honestly, in the White House, they call the person who does that the Wrangler. You know, they use the Western cowboy terminology.
Yes, exactly.
You're a wrangler. You're just wrangling the press to make sure they don't escape and run loose.
Yeah, bring out the lasso. Why not?
Exactly.
So it is a bit like that, but you still got the chance to sort of talk to people that were sort of coming in and out. One of those that I caught up with was the Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, and he's quite an interesting one to watch because he's become the face of sort of Florida for Donald Trump, and he's also somebody who I wanted to ask about the new demographic that we talked about yesterday.
Because he's African-American himself.
He's an African-American, and I said to him, when you hear Donald Trump trying to compare himself and his own life experience of these 91 indictments with what he thinks young black men go through, don't you find it deeply offensive?
No, and that's not the reason he's going to succeed with a lot of black men in this country. He's going to succeed with them because under his presidency, the border was secured. They were making more money. Inflation wasn't hurting their pockets. There was actual opportunities for upward mobility. All those things were present during the Trump presidency, and they are not present under Joe Biden. So I believe his message is very clear to black men, black voters in general, but really all voters, is that we can have a better America, but you got to have the right leadership. And Joe Biden has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is the wrong person to lead this country.
Isn't the flip side to that he knows he's not popular with women? He's lost a lot of women over the whole issue of abortion, so he's going after young black men because they like his machismo.
Actually, I don't agree with that. I think that if you listen to the president's statements on abortion, the president has said, look, we're going to find out something that works for everybody. He has said that. That's number one. Number two, there are a lot of women who also have been struggling under the same issues. So I think our message is not just about women or black men or Hispanic voters. It is about Americans.
And the other striking thing, I suppose, was who was at Trump's side tonight, because the choreography told its own tale. His eldest son, Don Jr., was sort of working the crowds from about 9 o'clock tonight, doing the photos, doing the handshakes. And then we saw Eric Trump with his wife Lara, who is, we think, going to be the next chair of the Republican National Committee, tying that wing of the party into the sort of Trump family business. And then Donald Trump appeared, solitary, on his own. No Melania.
Yeah, Melania has not been seen with Donald Trump since he left office in public, apart from at Melania Trump's mother's funeral. That's the only time we've seen Donald Trump by Melania's side. Donald Trump himself has gone after Nikki Haley because her husband hadn't been seen much. So it is fair to ask the question, where's Melania? Is she playing a role? Is she hiding? Is she around? Because tonight would have been the perfect opportunity, if she was supportive of his bid for a second term, to be there.
Yeah,
and she wasn't.
I suppose equally conspicuous in their absence, Ivanka and Jared.
Yeah,
now,
totally.
We were told, weren't we, that power attracts responsibility. In other words, there is a sense that some of the big people who were by his side would come back again if he made it. Up till now, really, pretty much, there has been no sign of his daughter or her husband wanting to be back in the presidential fold another time.
Well, remember, Ivanka Trump gave evidence to the January the 6th inquiry where she was asked whether she agreed with the Attorney General that there was no evidence of electoral fraud, and she said, yes, I agree with Bill Barr. So she's put herself at a distance from her father by admitting that. So, yes, the family were there, but they're not all pulling in the same direction.
We'll be back tomorrow. You've got a massive interview.
I hope so. And then there's Joe Biden's State of the Union speech on Thursday night, which is also pretty big, and I'll be in DC for that.
See you then.
Right, that is enough for one day. One last thing on the budget, though, we should just mention an unexpected measure. The Chancellor increased duty on business class flights. So we'd like to send, and I'm sure you would too, our thoughts and prayers with our very own John Sopel at this difficult time. And since we're talking about John, before we go, I do think we need to revisit this.
Boob jobs, butt lifts and Botox.
Sorry, what was that, John?
Boob jobs, butt lifts and Botox.
One more time.
Boob jobs, butt lifts and Botox.
That's it from us. Goodbye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.